Stugotz was asking Greg Cody about his shirt.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned together that this is a shirt that has been in Greg Cody's closet for 3 years. And this is the second time that that shirt has been worn. Now, how would you explain what that shirt is? I would say it's like the Bellagio vomited on a tablecloth is what I would say that shirt is.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
He read your mind?
The collar, if you're wearing it for only the second time, why is that collar standing up? The right collar is a little bit stiff.
Yeah, my wife told me about that before I left. She said she thought I was trying to look cool by having my collar up. I don't know why it's doing that. I don't. I'm going to have to ask my tailor about that.
It's a nice-looking shirt, though, Greg.
Thank you.
But you've given up on trying to look cool, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Stugotz, our cool, older analyst here who represents the person who has covered the Dolphins the longest and has a great deal of expertise. Can you tell me, please, what Derrick Henry did last season as he's clearly downhill, and what he means, I suppose, is that he's still running downhill because he's getting acreage of yardage.
I didn't mean he was over the hill. What I meant was, and I tend to put things through, when it comes to that position, I tend to put things through a fantasy football prism, where a couple of years ago, he might have been your overall number one draft pick. Now, I think his ADP is probably, Christopher, what is his ADP? 8?
He's getting drafted in the second round. It's funny, though, you have him on your team and kept him in fantasy.
I did. He was a keeper in my fantasy league. You're right. I still think he's a great back. I don't think he's as great as he was 2 years ago.
You just said a segment ago how quickly Derrick Henry has gone downhill.
Just to answer your question, Dan, just under 1,600 yards last year.
Right, but it took him a lot of carries to get there.
Yeah.
But to make my point, I use that as an example because that's the difference between Dalvin Cook and Jonathan Taylor. That's the difference between those two, is that Dalvin Cook is getting older for that position. Jonathan Taylor is still in his absolute prime for that position.
Nobody is paying running backs of any kind.
Correct.
And so the Dolphins would be the only – you're doing one of the best. Like, he was the leading rusher in the league, MVP candidate. Hell, I could have made the argument that Jonathan Taylor team, led by Jonathan Taylor, at one point toward the end of that season, if they had not lost the last game, I thought that team could have done exactly what the Bengals did in the playoffs, because even with shitty quarterback play, because of how good he was.
It should be noted, and I also subscribe to don't pay the running back, and they're cautionary tales like Ezekiel Elliott. But the running backs that have gotten their money recently, Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler now, these are running backs that are still producing at a very high level.
This is a running back that is worth paying. I'm with Greg. Like, I think if there's a running back to pay, it would be this guy. He's only 3 years into his career. The age is fine. He's 26 years old. And 2 years ago, Dan, that year, he had 1,800 yards and 18 touchdowns.
I'm not going to disagree with what it is that you guys are saying. I'm simply going to point out to you that 3 years ago or 2 years ago, I don't remember when it was, before I saw what would be a revolutionary change at that position, I argued on the wrong side with Mina Kimes, lose every argument on you got to pay Dalvin Cook years ago. You got to pay Ezekiel Elliott. Mm-hmm. You got to pay Melvin Gordon, because I was using faulty math. And as this machine that gets more and more efficient shows, we're going to get to the point that none of these guys are going to be paid. Like, that's you're pointing out the 3 or 4 that are getting paid, but there will be some breaking point on this. If they keep shaving the margins on this position the way that they're doing, where all the running backs want to strike. Wasn't there a report of a meeting? They had a Zoom meeting where they were talking about like faking injuries because what is happening with the economy of that position. Eventually, you're all going to be as wrong as I've been the last 3 years, because I was paying Gurley. I said you had to pay Gurley. I got every one of them wrong, because I thought those were difference-making backs, and now Ezekiel Elliott is signing some tiny deal. Nobody actually wants him with the Patriots.
I have the top 10 highest-paid running backs for this season against the salary cap. Number 10 is a new running back in a new place, Miles Sanders, who was very productive for Philadelphia. James Conner, sneaky productive. 6 is a tie between Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs. and Saquon Barkley. Aaron Jones is 5th. He's still doing his thing. Nick Chubb still performing at a high level. Derrick Henry still at a high level. Alvin Kamara is probably the one that you can pick at and say they're going to regret that, especially this year serving a 4-game suspension. Number 1 is Christian McCaffrey. What I'm saying is the top 10 are guys that still produce.
But the Giants already told you with Saquon Barkley where it is they are on that line by risking angering him because they wouldn't give him the kind of deal that he wanted. And you're not going to convince me that Jonathan Taylor's a lot better than Saquon Barkley.
A part potentially worth considering with Jonathan Taylor that's different than some of these other backs is he was run into the ground all 3 years in college. So I just looked up the difference. Jonathan Taylor ran the ball 926 times in college. That's 300 more carries than Derrick Henry had in college. And we felt like he was being run into the ground.
Yeah.
Which is wild because the book on Derrick Henry was he's probably not going to get drafted as high because of all the tread on his tires entering the league.
I think the top tier of running backs, Chubb, McCaffrey, Taylor, those guys are still going to get paid. I think the difference is it's going to be 2- and 3-year contracts. You're not going to see any running back signed to a 5-year deal anymore. It's just not going to happen. That's why if the Dolphins can get Jonathan Taylor on a smart 2-year deal for a second-round pick, that's what they want to do because that fits their right-now window.
That's not going to happen.
It can if there's no market for him.
He wants to get traded so he can get his new deal. Now
it's not going to be a 2-year deal.
It's been well, you trade your assets for him and you get him on your existing deal, and you hope that it's such a toxic relationship between he and Irsay that he'll just accept the move to spite Jim Irsay without a contingent on an extension. But I mean, if you apply just common logic, you'd think that he'd be going to a place that is already kind of agreed in principle to give him an extension.
Are you okay with the Dolphins? You realize you bring in a guy like Jonathan Taylor and you give him his money, you're not bringing back either a Waddle. Maybe you have to get rid of Tyreek's deal. Like there's a cap here. You can't just spend all this money.
I do think Tyreek is the guy. Tyreek's got a I don't think Tyreek's ending his career here.
But that's the
in
question
Miami.
you have to say. It's not just about, of course, who wouldn't want Jonathan Taylor? It's okay if we bring in Jonathan Taylor, a position that you don't really need to spend on. Now we can't re-sign Wilkins. We can't re-sign Waddle.
Right.
Yeah, I think
Javon Holland.
I think
as well.
looking at the roster, Tyreek's probably the guy that's not going to get to that next contract that you separate yourself from, and hope that Jalen Waddle can fill that role as he was admirably even before Tyreek Hill got here.
It's really amazing. We're talking about one of the best players in the NFL, and I understand what you're saying, Chris, but we've arrived at a point where that player is not worth paying for because you can get him in the discount bin. I can't believe it.
No, but
the running backs were the stars of the league at one point.
What I would say, though, on this, because I do think the economics of this are super interesting. The key, I think, in that sport and what the Dolphins are doing that's dangerous is the key in that sport is not merely to have great players. It's to have great players at value. It's to have Waddle. It's to have Tua. It's to have guys that you're not paying a ton because everyone's competing within a salary cap. It makes everything very even. And so the place that you get your biggest advantages is we have great player, but we also have him cheap. And the Dolphins are going to have a lot of expensive players and players from other places, not players that you groomed, players that proved and gave their primes, gave those value years to someone else. Hell, Taylor gave them to Wisconsin. Like gave the prime of his career and his youth and his body, gave the value years to somebody else. So you're buying high on all these guys.
But they're not getting him for a 4-year plan. They're getting him to win this year or next year.
Correct.
Like, that's why they'll throw the money at
But
him
he's
because they know this is all going to fall apart in 2 or 3 years.
But he's not going to make this incredible mess that he's making to sign some sort of short-term deal where he can get hurt because he wants a 1-year deal. He's going to leverage that at what is the height of his value to get the contract he wants.
Yeah, maybe. They'll have a bad contract with him and they'll probably lose players, but they're doing it to capitalize on the players that they have now for the next 2 years, let's say. And then they know we're going to get stuck with Jonathan Taylor, or maybe not, because it's football and you can always get out of those contracts somehow, and you're going to lose a lot of your players. But they're trying to capitalize on this window right now and win now.
It's capitalizing on the peak, right? It's trying to make the peak that this roster will have the highest it can possibly be, and understanding that on the back end, you may very well struggle. But if you're looking at a contract difference...
It's the Rams.
Right, but if you're looking at a difference between paying a player like Jonathan Taylor or, say, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor had 700 more carries in college.
Reportedly, 2 teams are interested in Jonathan Taylor.
There's always a mystery team.
Okay, but
Put
reported
it on the poll, Juju. Is there always a mystery team?
Well, the
Leverage.
reports are the Colts have received 2 serious offers,
Right.
and then up to 6 teams have inquired about Jonathan Taylor.
Right, and the Dolphins are in a position of power because I don't feel like they desperately need him. I think if they can get him at their price, fine, go ahead and sign him. And for me, their price should be a 1 or 2 year contract. A lot of money, but for 1 or 2 years. If they can't do that, Raheem Mostert is a perfectly fine running back, particularly in that offense where you're going to throw 250 passes to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle alone.
But Greg, you're not getting him for 1 or 2 years. He's only going to sign here if he feels like he gets the deal that he wants.
You're like saying it's such an unlikely
Right.
scenario. Yes, they should of course sign him to the best deal for the
That's
team.
right.
It's like
Right.
that's
Of course,
never
that's
going to
exactly-
happen.
because they're in a position of power to do that.
Chris, Cody, your father has been writing that column in this market for 40 goddamn years. Get Patrick Mahomes for $1.
But
I endorse.
Trade your backup quarterback and a 6th round pick for Patrick Mahomes.
But you guys aren't listening to what he's saying. He's saying that's the only reason they should
Thank
get
you,
him. If
Billy.
not, they don't need him. So if they can't get that, then they pass on him.
Exactly.
Not that they need him at that price.
Billy is right.
I'm listening to every word. Perfect show, no notes.
Billy's right. I mean, I'm not.
Well, I'm just saying what I'm explaining what you said, so you're just saying you're right.
Greg, you're acting like you wouldn't want Jonathan Taylor if the Dolphins signed him to a 4-year deal. You would.
It depends.
You either
on,
think he's good or not.
Okay, not if it means you can't re-sign Christian Wilkins and Javon Holland. I mean, I'm thinking of the entirety here.
Let's do all of it.
So
Let's
you
bring
don't
in
want
Jonathan
him.
Taylor, re-sign all the
So
guys.
you don't want him,
He's
or you
saying
do
you
want
get
him?
Mahomes
only
for a
get him
sixth,
if
right.
you can do the other thing. If
Yeah.
not, you pass on him.
That's exactly what I'm saying. And you know, when Le Batard over here is saying I want to get Patrick Mahomes for $1,
This is the new and unimproved Dan Le Batard Show with the Stugotz. Gamble on by DraftKings.